It is easy from our modern perspective, with our planes, trains and automobiles, to forget how people used to get about back in older times. We frequently travel, whether it's the long drive from Nashville to the Smoky Mountains, or a train from London to Salisbury, even a plane from Bristol to Malaga. A simple walk to the next town or even the local pub can be counted as travel. So we've all travelled at some point in our lives, using the various technologies available to us. But what if we didn't have those technologies? How did people get about in simpler times? Did people really walk all the way from London to Rome? Short answer, yes, many did. But it was probably simpler to take a ship, which would most likely be cheaper than going by land, which required much more stops, thus more places to stay, which were also a far cry from anything we're used to today. But before I go any further, I'll remind people that I'll be concentrating mainly on medieval Europe, as that is the focus of the channel. I might dip into the Romans now and then, or the Middle East on occasion, even later periods if it must, as it might be a good idea to describe some semblance of progress in technologies as time went on. After all, people might be interested in such inventions, as they tend to alter drastically as you enter the Renaissance and beyond. Though, I'm sure we can skip going to the moon and back. I mean, it's hardly a holiday destination or a pilgrimage, at least not from an older point of view. Though, Roger Bacon, the man who invented the pig, probably had that on his bucket list. I'm joking, by the way. Roger Bacon didn't invent the pig. He wasn't an inventor. He was a monk and a scholar. But he was also a scientist, and he did predict horseless carriages and flying machines. He was very good at optics, which would lead to the invention of the telescope. So some of our tech might not have been so outlandish after all, at least not to the men of science of the medieval period. Others, though, take in mind that even as far as the Middle Ages, they knew the world wasn't flat. They knew it was global. And also I will separate this video into two main parts, travel and accommodation. And where you stayed, as always, came down to those round, shiny things called coins. It also came down to motive. Why travel in the first place? If you're a villain ploughing the Lord's lands, you've probably got no want or ability to travel very far. If you're a baron, you are travelling all over the place, from the royal courts to the various military campaigns. But what about everybody else? Did people go on holiday? Was tourism even a thing back then? I mean, pilgrimages are a kind of tourism, right? But pilgrims aren't doing this for relaxation following a stressful year of hard work. And no, that's not Batman's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. And I've noticed you don't see many of these fashions in reenactments either. Anyway, back to the pilgrims. They're doing it for religious reasons. Same in the Islamic world, where many would complete the Hajj, the holy pilgrimage to Mecca. So, if you're living in Egypt and want to complete the Hajj, that's a month of travel, in often hostile environments. Now imagine a Muslim in Al-Andalus, in occupied Spain. That's one heck of a journey. Thankfully, not every pilgrimage is so daunting. But there were rewards. For medieval Christians, completing such a pilgrimage would even earn you a special badge, a most treasured item. Oh my giddy aunt, what pilgrimage did he go on? It gives the London to Brighton marathon a whole new meaning. And a pilgrimage could mean anything from going to one side of Paris to the other. Eleanor of Aquitaine, I am looking at you. or a year-long trek from St David's in Wales, all the way to Jerusalem in Terra Sancti, the Holy Land. There could be many reasons to travel. A young man or woman might leave their home in the French countryside to find work and adventure in the expanding city of Gay Paris. Oh no, not just yet. Le Marais won't be around for centuries. Actually, the monk's wrong. Le Marais is very much around in the 13th century, but it's not what people see today. It's pretty much just a royal residence and a Templars church. The Romans certainly had tourism. A popular destination was the town of Pompeii, where graffiti exists, written by travellers who frequented the many taverns and brothels. And these were pretty much the equivalent to modern-day middle-class city folks who travelled to the coast for a break. They just took horses and carts and wagons and stuff. This wasn't a jet-to holiday. Another reason was exploration, where chaps like Pythias decided that the colony of Massalia was a tad boring this time of year, so decided to take a ship around Europe and saw strange exotic wonders like the British Isles. And then he saw Wigan and buggered off to Scandinavia. Eventually he returns back to Massalia, and no one believed him. His story was so far-fetched. If he would have taken back a Wigan wedding cake, maybe they would have believed him. Yeah, I'm being silly. Yeah, he would have seen the Celtic tribes that predated Boudica by hundreds of years. Later, in the 13th century, you had Marco Polo, the man that invented the hole. He travelled all the way from Italy to Mongol-controlled China. He saw many wonders, and sometimes people don't believe him either. So yes, there were many reasons to travel. So for the sake of the video, I'll assume we have some reason to travel, and go through the various places you will encounter on the way, from inns to manors, depending on your standing. Right, before we set off, let's do some preparation. Do we know where we are going? How do we plan our route? Surely we can't just up and leave, so let's plan ahead. Right, where do we start? There must be some maps, right? Right? Well, there's the thing. Look at this. Oh, God, you lot, dirty minds. That's Britain. Okay, yeah, the image is on its side. Let's fix that. Oh, even worse. Anyway, here we go. You can now grasp the length of the country.
Stop messing about.
But it is hardly recognisable. Some maps are worse, from our perspective anyway. And these three are medieval. The 13th century at the earliest, that's the one on the right. The 15th century at the latest, that's the chap in the middle. So, not really useful for a traveller in the 12th. Plus, these are rare and owned only by the privileged few. Then, to top it off, they are big buggers. The one in the centre is as large as an oak door. The one on the left is the Hereford Mappamundi, and it is around 1.3 to 1.5 metres in measurement, or around 8 to 6 red squirrels. Anything but metric, right? It's around 4 to 5 feet, but hardly something you're going to roll up and keep in your backpack. They are not designed for travel. Maps, that is, not backpacks. So, without maps, what are we using? Well, there's word of mouth for a start. If you're only going from, say, York to London, you can simply ask people. Cities have gates, gates lead to roads, and all the locals can point you in the right direction. But what if your journey is a lot longer? What if you're travelling from London to Rome? Well, you're probably going by sea anyway. Like I said before, it's cheaper. However, cheaper does not mean better, as ships in older times weren't modern-day luxury liners. Far from it. Ships were cramped. Conditions were bad. You can get maggots and weevils in your bread or scurvy. If you've watched an episode of Hornblower or seen Master and Commander, even read the books, you'll understand just how bad things could be. And these are based in the Napoleonic era, and they are military ships. Large galleons with several floors, many rows of hammocks and cannon. You've got a roof over your head, but this is as luxurious as it's going to get. Because we're not all joining the Navy. We're all travellers from different walks of life. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales meets Captain Pugwash. Oi, oi! So, we could be hopping on a small fishing boat. We could be taking a medieval trading cog halfway across the old world. We could be on the Mayflower. Our experience really does depend on what ship we're taking. The sea itself also plays a big part, as the Mediterranean is a lot calmer than the Atlantic. Let's have a butcher's at the Roman times. This is a boat from Herculaneum, Italy. It's hardly going to fare well in a strong storm, and your roof is probably just some whacked canvas. You're getting wet, assuming it does decide to rain, as more likely you're getting scorched by the sun. But if you're only going from Neapolis to Salerno, no problem, right? It could be quite a relaxing trip, hugging the coast and passing the Isle of Capri on the way. Though I will mention the fact that you're being a lazy scallywag, because you can get from Neapolis to Salerno in one day. And you could, on the other hand, be navigating the harsher waters of the North Sea in a Norse longship, taking in mind the Vikings travelled all the way to modern-day Turkey. These chaps took sea voyages very seriously indeed. These voyages were often dangerous. Waves alone can turn the hardest of stomachs. You would pray the seas were calm. Many ships have been lost by a rogue wave. Rocks are always a danger. Routes could be perilous. Even the channel that separates England and France is a pig to cross in the wrong weather conditions. There are reasons why superstitious people conjured images of sea monsters in the depths of these dangerous seas. Plus, you've got the risk of pirates, such as the likes of Eustace the Monk or Thomas Dunn. Oh, forget Blackbeard. These were no gentlemen. They were scoundrels who would sooner massacre the crew than leave a witness. One such pirate, William Brusco, tries to have King Henry III assassinated. It doesn't work. Yet, that's all the negativity out of the way. The simple truth is, people did prefer these routes. You didn't even need to plan a great deal, as the captains of the ships knew the way. You could pay your way with chores, coin, even prayer. Every ship loves a priest. Your journey would take you port to port, either sleeping on the ship's deck or in one of the many types of accommodation you'll find there. And you can even jump from ship to ship. Let's just hope there's not some war on, and the port you were trying to get to is blockaded, delaying your journey further, or forcing you to take a land route. Though saying that, if your destination is inland, you'll be needing to walk across dry land anyway. So, let's go by road. We're either going by foot or horse, though in the Middle Ages women preferred to travel in wagons covered in cloth, as did some men. But vehicles like this frequently got stuck in bad weather. Terrain that was too rough could cause a wheel to break, and it's not like you're carrying a spare wagon wheel, is it now? On the other hand, horses can get injured, throw a shoe. If you get really unlucky, a horse can get spooked and throw the rider, like what happened to the eldest son of Louis le Gros. Philip's horse got spooked by a loose peg and fell, crushing poor Philip. In the Middle Ages, you travelled by your wits. Oh, and you might also want to travel with others, as there can be bandits and other dangers on the road ahead. People often travelled in groups. It was just how things were done. And obviously it's not an exact science and depends on the length of travel, but the more the merrier, right? You'd end up sharing tales, having drinks together, sitting by campfires by the roadside, and if you were lucky, you could end up with quite the convoy. Or you could be on your Jack Jones, whistling your way from Lancashire to London, with or without the cat. But the thing is, that's all fiction anyway, because the real Dick Whittington was a wealthy merchant from Gloucester. He's the son of a politician, appointed by King Richard II himself as the Mayor of London, and he held the position for 4 terms over a 10-year span. But anyway, enough about Dick, back to travel. We've got our travelling cloak. We've got a satchel of goods, as well as some coin. We're on the horse or wagon, and we're about to meet up with some fellow travellers before setting off. Let's ask someone who knows. How do we get from London to Rome? Well, you're probably told, head east until they speak French, then continue east until they don't. We'll just head to the next major city, Paris. It's on the way. When we're in Paris, we'll be told to navigate a mountain pass between Lyon and Turin, known as the Alps, and then finally the long trek to Rome itself. It's a month-long journey at least, that will include food, accommodation and any tolls. Are there any wars on? We might discover obstacles which add days or weeks to the journey. If we're really unlucky, months or years. But it's going to be quite the adventure. Anyway, I think I'd better start explaining the roads, as there is neither the pavements which we're used to, nor the tarmac. In the Middle Ages, roads were often dusty, muddy dirt tracks. They were always uneven and seldom took a direct route, preferring to weave round hills and other obstacles, snaking across the countryside, which was mostly unkempt. Some roads were made by laying planks of wood, others paved with stone, often in serious need of repair. Depending on the season, entire areas could be flooded, especially in the colder climates of Europe. Storms could easily make you think twice about progressing any further. Even these days, the biting wind can stop progress. And also, don't rely on the bridges. Most are built out of wood. Many were built centuries ago and haven't been repaired in years. They are far and few between. If a bridge is inaccessible, the next crossing may involve a detour miles long. Many bridges also have tolls. Rivers can also have ferry crossings, but the ferryman might simply refuse to take you if there's a sizable number. He might not want to do 7 or 8 trips. So making a journey would have been disrupted like this during the Middle Ages, and there are a good few mentions of people having to find shelter during harsh storms. You also have the other extreme, the heat, as for the most part you're in a medieval warm period, meaning it's a few degrees hotter, though not as hot as the centuries-long heatwave during the Roman Empire and the Old Republic. In 1137, when Louis the Dauphin of France headed off with his entourage to marry Eleanor of Aquitaine. The weather was so hot they could not travel by day. Instead, they travelled by night, sleeping in the day's shade. Just like these two little scallywags. In the Middle East, you also have dust storms, bad enough for the people that lived out there, even worse for the Christian pilgrims, who were only used to northern France. As I said earlier, you travelled by your wit. And so, we're on our epic journey. And yes, it does class as epic. We have swords. The sun is low, and our minds will be turning to where we rest our heads for the night. You might think first of inns and hotels. They existed in the Middle Ages, right? Surely. We've all seen the movies, where travellers put 2 coins on the counter and ask for a room and enough ale to slake their thirst. Or Jesus walks in, puts 2 nails on the counter and says, "Put me up for the night." No. Anyway, there is some truth to this. The inns, that is, as coaching inns and the like did exist. But going back to Jesus, we've all heard of the phrase, "no room at the inn." So I'll deal with a few possibilities of accommodation to give you an idea. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, as humans have a good knack for inventive ways of doing things. My granddad lived in Kenya, and one night ended up having to sleep up a tree after being chased by a rogue hippo. I myself once slept in an open barn during a camping trip in the 80s, as the storm prevented the tent from going up. Loved that trip. So, I'll start with the obvious. Let's take advice from Billy Joe Spears and lay that blanket on the ground, though not for the reasons she suggests. Our plan is to sleep. People do use this method. It's the cheapest, especially an army on the march. They don't all have tents. The rank and file are more than often sleeping in the open, sleeping rough. Same with a vagabond ejected from a city and now on the road. But us, we're just weary travellers. We're most likely part of a group or convoy. We might only be in a situation due to floods. We might have found the city walls barred shut, so now decide to camp out in the open. We could in this day and age pitch up tents, but do take in mind that this won't be your average Vanguard dart. Tents in this day and age were large affairs, involving canvas and wooden poles, plus any equipment you have with you. You're more than likely just using a blanket roll. But unless you're in the open plains, you're not going to be able to form your wagons into a laager, or pitch up groups of tents. You're most likely going to be higgledy-piggledy on the roadside and fields, hopefully not buggering up some peasant's crop. You might find an empty barn, or disused building, maybe even some ruins. But are there any animals about? After all, you don't want to be woken up by a piglet. And sleeping out in the open like this was wrought with danger. Packs of wolves were still a problem in Europe. They killed many. You've got wild boar. In the wild, the humans are not the apex predator. Well, unless the nobility decide to race through the forest with a pack of dogs. And even then, they can still fall foul of wild boar and wolves. You're exposed to the elements, and the medieval warm period doesn't mean that Europe was a sauna. It rains. A lot. Ralph of Coggeshall complains about it. A lot. Sometimes rains are so bad that the hailstones are described as big as goose eggs. Can you even light a fire? Will your provisions get spoiled? So this mode of sleeping is not advised. But if your group is smaller in number, there is another last resort: hospitality. First, we arrive at a fork in the road. See? There it is. One thing we have to take in mind in the Middle Ages is the idea of hospitality as a charity. For the most part, people helped one another. It was the Christian thing to do. After all, Jesus instilled the very concept of hospitality. He was the one who said, "One day I'll be coming knocking on the door, and you shall let me in and eat with me." Sure, in that instance, he means salvation, but it can be seen in many different ways. And should a peasant open his door to find a wandering pilgrim on his way to the newly built church at Saint-Denis in Paris, they'd be obliged to let them in and offer them a roof for the night. Now, obviously, this wasn't an exact science, and many pilgrims would have been turned away, but do remember that this would most likely work on the conscience of the medieval mind. It would most likely bug them for days, not knowing what happened to that stranger. And should the traveller fall to harm, it could be on their conscience for years. And you're most likely just sleeping on the floor in a peasant's house out in the sticks. But it's a roof over their head, away from those elements I spoke to about a minute ago. And you'd be sharing that roof with the family that lives here, and it could be a family of 8. Also, don't expect anything too opulent. The meal here, everything will be meagre. But it's the best they have got to give, so be grateful. There may even be animals here in the house, not just dogs or cats, but sheep, pigs, children. Most likely, this home is also the place of work, especially if you're passing through a more built-up area. It could be homes of blacksmiths or merchants. There could be tools lying around, and you don't want to be in the way. In return, you could help out. Pay kind with kind. You could share a meal, say grace, then carry on with your journey. Now, another type of hospitality would be religious buildings, like churches or monasteries. Back then, there was also still the concept of sanctuary, where criminals and fugitives on the run could stay, immune from arrest. They could stay there a number of days when negotiations could begin. And you didn't need to be poor to seek sanctuary. The Earl of Kent, Hubert de Burgh, seeks it when King Henry III demands his arrest. Though, when he does this again, he is simply dragged out of the church. But we're not on the run, we're travellers. Still, we could seek this method in an emergency. Take in mind, though, you're going to be on the floor, as there are no ranks of pews. These are more humble times. So you're better off finding a monastery. After all, most monasteries have lodging houses, hostels, almshouses. If you're unlucky, there might be an adjacent leper colony. But travellers are always welcome. Monasteries are run by monks. But not everyone here has taken a total vow of silence. Many help out in a town, especially the Cistercian monks, who are always out and about. They'll be tending to the travellers. And a monastery is a self-sustaining colony. They grow their own food, tend to their own animals, brew their own ale. So, like the peasant's house, you might be roped in to help out a bit. Of course, a monastery isn't somewhere where you can simply roam freely. Most of it's out of bounds. You'll stick to your own quarters, which will be very meagre indeed, and don't expect a bed. There will also be prayer. Though in this day and age, there's always prayer. So, already we're getting the idea that travelling isn't just a privilege of the wealthy. Poorer people can find a roof over their head in many cases. Do take in mind also that a peasant wouldn't be looking at these places in disdain. They have grown up in environments like this all their lives. And travelling clergy would find the monasteries nice and welcoming. And if you happen to be of the same denomination of monk as the chaps inside, then you'll be with the main building, assuming they have space. And yes, outside of monasteries, you also have nunneries, but they're pretty much the same, just run by women, not men. And you also have the dual monasteries, which is a nunnery and a monastery all in one place. Overall, this type of accommodation is much better than simply dropping in on some poor peasant who's already struggling to feed their own family, let alone travellers. Right, let's take this up a notch. Let's assume we've got some coin, and that we've been blessed with a nice safe journey. The gates of the town are open, and we're looking for an inn for a night or two. Inns are probably the first thing you think of when hearing the word medieval. The classic tavern with room and board, a burly innkeeper behind a counter, complete with moustache and apron, pints of beer carried around by busty women, while weary travellers sit around a table beside a roaring log fire. But how much truth is there to this? In all honesty, it's not too far off. Inns are purpose-built buildings with accommodation in mind, large affairs with stables and coaching bays, though some are bigger than others. It could be a townhouse with only a few rooms and a kitchen. It could be a grand affair, easily mistaken for a lord's manor, protected by high walls and a strong gate. They are most likely a family-run business. And yes, business, because the innkeeper's idea here is to make money, not run a charity. Inns at the cheaper end of the scale were often rough and ready, especially when the ale or wine got flowing, or the gambling got out of hand, so the innkeepers tended to be old-school, no-nonsense types, ready to turf out anyone pushing their luck. Drunks, criminals, or men who lost heavily in gambling and now cannot afford the rent. Well, those chaps are now thrown out into the street, and they can find one of the previous accommodations, if they're lucky. For the rest of us, we can expect food and drink. We can also expect entertainment, as there'll be many travelling minstrels up and down the kingdom, singing all kinds of popular songs. Or, if you're travelling across Celtic lands, like Ireland or Wales, or Scotland, you might come across a bard, the storytellers of the age, who will weave you a tale of old. Though don't expect a bar, not as we'd know it. That won't come around until much later, in the saloons of the Old West. In the Middle Ages, you've probably got some barrels of ale and some mugs. The kitchen is most likely out the back in another room. Depending on the establishment, the quality varies, as does the price, and location is also a factor. An inn located in rural Cornwall or a coastal village in Nice would be far more humble and meagre than an inn located next to the city gates of Paris, York or London. It will also dictate to what they are putting at your table. It's most likely going to be a soup that's been cooking all day, with some bread and some cheese and some ale. Everything's going to be seasonal, and that coastal inn in Nice would no doubt have fresh fish served. The inn could be close to a monastery, where the local monks have a brewery, the abbot's best. Most likely the beer is brewed on site though. Or wine. A rural inn might even have its own vineyard, especially in rural France. Just don't expect luxury. We're not going to be seeing beds, cupboards and chests of drawers. You're probably still on the floor or on a pallet, and most likely sharing a room. As our travelling group cannot be expected to have their own separate rooms, there's about 10 of us. Sometimes there could be more than 30. But what about the nobleman who joined our group a few days ago? Where would he be staying? And what about the abbess atop her horse? Surely they wouldn't be knocking on the doors of peasants or trolling the inns. Well, the abbess could drop in on a nunnery. She'd be welcomed there, but she's hardly going to slum it in the accommodation of a monastery. Her social standing is that of the knight, who equally won't be risking his jewellery in an inn full of scallywags either. The upper class would have most likely already fixed their accommodation ahead of time. The abbess could be staying at the deanery adjacent to the local cathedral or a local lord's manor. She could even be joining the knight as he heads to Shepstow Castle in Wales. He's already sent a letter to William Marshall before setting off, and he is expected. They've not seen each other in years. The room is already prepared. But the knight might forego his room, giving it to the abbess, following the chivalric ideals of Prudhomme. As everything is prepared in advance, there'd no doubt be a feast in the Great Hall. The nobility liked any excuse for a feast. Saint's Day, feast. Weddings, feast. Funeral, feast. Stub your toe on the chair leg, feast. That would be 2 feasts. But circumstances change, because only 2 days ago, our group's journey was diverted due to severe flooding, and the knight, along with the abbess, headed to a nearby castle, a small motte bailey belonging to a minor knight, who is little more than a mercenary. There was no preparation, so they had to sleep on the floor of the Great Hall, and there was no feast. So pretty much covered under hospitality really, albeit on fellow nobility, not peasants. The same would also go for a rich merchant, like the chap who parted ways in London. He's staying with a good friend, the mayor of the city, Richard Whittington. He's also prepared his journey long in advance, and he frequently stays with his old friend. And there we have it. Travel and accommodation in the Middle Ages. It was quite the adventure. Well, after that, I think it's time to sit down and enjoy a nice pint of the Abbott's Best. Thank you for watching.